Okay, so let's have a look at some inference questions now. So here is our first question. Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children and he smiled. Why do you think they smiled? Because his children smiled back at him as well, didn't they? Okay, so before we answer this question, we need to look at the key parts. So the first key part of this question is the quote, isn't it? Which we can probably find in the book. Now, the second key word in our question is why. Okay, now if we have a question that starts with why, what are we looking for? Yes, we're looking for a reason. So we're looking for a reason, and a reason for what? Well, we're looking for a reason why they smiled. Okay, so we're looking for a reason why Mr. Fox and his children smiled. Now, remember, with an inference question, the answer isn't in the text for you to just pick out. We need to use clues and our background knowledge to help us answer the question. So let's have a look at the part of the chapter where we can find this, because remember, Badger tells Mr. Fox and the small foxes that everybody is starving to death. And Mr. Fox then looks at his 3 children and he smiled. Okay, so let's have a look. It says Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children and he smiled. So if we highlight that to show you where it is in the text, and then it also says the children smiled back at him, sharing his secret. Okay, so let's have a think. What do we know? Well, we know that, as I said, the badger has just told Mr. Fox that they are starving to death. But we also know that Mr. Fox and the small foxes took some chickens from Boggis's chicken house number 1. Okay, so the family is starving, Badger's family, but Mr. Fox knows that at home he has some chickens. Okay, so do we think he might think that he can help the badger and his family and all of the other families? Well, yes, he probably does, doesn't he? So therefore, we could write that in our answer. We've inferred that he thinks he might be able to help. So I've written an answer here. Would you like to see? Okay, so Badger has just told us that his family are starving to death. So I think Mr. Fox and the small foxes smiled at each other because they knew they can help. Okay, so that is my answer to the question. And look, I've used because I need a reason. So if we're giving a reason for something, we use the word because, don't we? The conjunction because. Well, then I've written another sentence to further explain how they can help. So I've written, they have just stolen some chickens, which they could possibly share. Okay, so that's how they could help Badger and why they might be smiling. Because remember, Mrs. Fox is preparing a feast. Maybe they could go along too. Well, we know from reading the chapter that they were invited to the feast. So yes, they can definitely share. And that is probably what Mr. Fox was thinking when he smiled, that he'd be able to invite them to his feast. So there we go. Well, let's have a look at the next question. So Badger was angry that it was Mr. Fox's fault. Give one piece of evidence from the text which suggests this. Okay, so let's have a look at the keywords. Well, we have Badger. Okay, we're looking at his feelings and we're looking at why he's feeling angry. Okay, so Badger's feeling angry at Mr. Fox because it was all his fault. So we're looking for one piece of evidence from the text which suggests this. One thing in the text that tells us that Badger was angry with Mr. Fox. So if we have a look at where Mr. Fox says, "My dear old Badger," he said, "this mess you're in is all my fault." "I know it's your fault," said Badger furiously, "and the farmers are not going to give up till they've got you. Unfortunately, that means us as well. It means everyone on the hill." Badger sat down and put a paw around his son. Okay, so he's putting a paw around his son because he knows his son's starving to death and it's all Mr. Fox's fault, isn't it? So he's comforting his son. "We're done for," he said softly. "My poor wife up there is so weak she can't dig another yard." So there we go. We found the part in the text that you're going to need to answer this question. So it is now your turn. If you could have a go at answering question number 2, and then on your resource, Year 2 Reading, 5th of March, Resource 2, you have some other questions as well, which are inference questions. And also don't forget to go back to the first question that we did together and answer that. If you want to go back in the video and use that in your answer, that is completely fine. Well, okay, Year 2, have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you in our next reading lesson, which will be when we're back at school. Bye, everyone.